welcome everyone here today. And I would like to say that I have a tendency to get these coughing spells from talking so much, and there's a lot to talk about today. So please forgive me. The barometric pressure always affects my sinuses, so I apologize. And I'd like to start by saying that one could write a very, very thick book encompassing Nicholson's stores and businesses throughout the ages. And even then, it would be impossible to include them all or even to document their existence. So with a few exceptions, such as uniqueness or distinctiveness of some of them, today's history presentation will be limited to the stores and businesses for which the buildings still exist, or for which some of us old-timers remember where they were and what they were used for. I didn't include you, Joe. No name calling. Once the early pioneers staked their claims, cleared the land, and built their houses, the next order of business was just that. Someone realized the necessity and the opportunity of providing supplies to the settlers and opened a store with household items otherwise unavailable. These early stores were always of a general merchandise variety, carrying a little bit of everything, and so it was, until settlements grew into villages, villages into towns, and towns into cities. With more people, there was more demand for goods, and the small general store wasn't big enough to carry all the inventory needed to supply the masses. As population grew, so did the retail business. More general merchandise stores were springing up, as did stores for specific merchandise. In part because the merchants sold items they made exclusively by hand. The tailor or dressmaker sold custom-made clothing. The blacksmith, who worked over a forge and crafted tools and objects out of iron, were essential to the society of 19th century. The cooper made wooden barrels, buckets, and tubs to sell. The wheelwright made and sold all sorts of wagons, carriages, buggies, sleighs, bobsleds, sleds for children, wheelbarrows, and every known article usually made in a wagon shop. The cordwainer made boots, shoes, and all things made of leather, custom ordered. The furniture store sold handmade items, and because he had the various exotic woods and woodworking tools available, he also made coffins. Quite often, he would have to go to the house and measure the deceased for a proper fit. Consequently, because there were no embalming in those days, more often than not, the proprietor of a furniture store doubled as an undertaker. Eventually, this practice subsided when embalming techniques were developed and required the newly formed profession of a funeral director to seek an education in such matters. However, as late as 1970, mind you, 1970, this practice still existed, at least in Tunkhannock, as evidenced by this ad in the Trail Examiner. With the Industrial Revolution came factories with mass production methods, and with the birth of the railroad to transport goods, handmade articles were no longer the main stock in trade of some store owners. These types of previously mentioned businesses over time became less and less popular as people wanted the new factory-made items, and their trades vanished because of it. 220 years ago, the first store opened by Caleb Roberts in what eventually became known as Nicholson at the bottom of Roberts Hill, now Bacontown Road. The store was a large framed building, and in 1811, it was popular among the early settlers in that section of Nicholson, and many houses and other businesses grew around it and Bacon's Inn. Nathan Bacon, in addition to a hotel, also built a store about 1837 and stocked it with all the items needed for pioneer living. The family operated it until the railroad came. With all the business having moved closer to the train depot and away from Bacontown, a Civil War veteran named George Nicholson opened a small store from his home near Bacontown at 124 West State Street in 1910. He sold groceries and dairy products. He operated this business for 25 years there before Merle Millard took over and operated it until 1958. Some of you may remember several other businesses that occupied homes on State Street over the years, including Merwin Geverett's Beauty Salon. Later, Sherry Huffsmith continued the hairstyling business from there for a while before moving to the old A&M Motel up on the trail. Dr. Robert Mancuso had a chiropractic business in his home. Elmer Schweppenheiser sold insurance. Dr. William Llewellyn also had his office in his home. And George Renville opened a funeral home now owned by Litlands. It should be noted that Main Street did not immediately become the hubbub of business activity. The first store that occupied the downtown business district was built in 1835 along Martins Creek near the current Nicholson Tire Service on Walnut Street. It was built by Jasper Stevens and it was successful due to the numerous houses built along the creek. Jasper's wife continued to operate the store after Jasper's death in 1857, and for a number of years until it became unprofitable to do so because of the increased activity on Main Street. In more recent times, Walnut Street was the home of Irene's Sportswear Blouse Factory, the current Nicholson Tire Service, and formerly Jay's Tires. The Belvedere Bowling Lanes was built on this street and opened in 1960. Clara Rogers also published the Nicholson Examiner in one of the buildings behind the current fire hall for a number of years. The Nicholson Beer Distributor was on this street as well. Near the depot is a small building, now the home of Jackson Hewitt. For years, Hoadley Insurance was in this building. It was also the veterinary office of Wendy Rosedale Himes for a short time. In all probability, the most popular business in town was on Oak Street. Although not a store, the Rink or Opera House was a very unique multi-purpose business in the borough. It was built in 1884 by E.L. Bacon as an indoor roller skating rink along the bank of Martins Creek next to the footbridge. Unfortunately, this is the only photo we have discovered to date and showing only a glimpse of it. It was about 50 feet wide and 110 feet long. On the south end was a stage 20 feet deep, elevated about 3 feet above the floor and equipped with dressing rooms. On the three sides, there was a narrow one-step platform to reach the row of chairs where the spectators sat. On the northwest side was a small kitchen, and opposite it was a coat room. The main door opened from the north end, where there was a ticket booth. The floor was made of maple and was absolutely tight with no spring and no apparent seams. It was open every night during the week. Those who could skate with a glass of water on their heads and not spill it were awarded a prize. It was a favorite pastime among the adults. Dances were also popular and held frequently. The floor was rubbed with paraffin wax and cornmeal to speed the movement of the dancers, and classes were taught in learning the newest dance steps. And the music was provided by an Edison phonograph with Morning Glory horn. The Nicholson Dramatic Society was formed, and local people would try out for parts in plays which ranged from comedy to Shakespeare. For years, there was a spring and a fall play, and when these performances were being produced, the rink was called the Opera House. When St. Patrick's Church burned in 1890 and the Universalist Church in 1896, the rink was rented for worship services until the new churches were rebuilt. Basketball was just coming into popularity, and the rink was opened for this purpose as well. About 1904, moving pictures were being shown. The 10-cent admission fee was no drawback, as the movies were immediately popular. 400 people could easily be seated on the main floor at one time, and another 50 persons could be seated on the platform, and 200 more could stand. In the early days of the fire company, the firemen's two-day fairs were held at the rink and included sports, dinners, and 4-act plays. Commencement exercises for the Nicholson High School were held at the rink or Opera House from 1896 to 1915, as it had the largest auditorium of any building in town. The Billings Post number 392, Grand Army of the Republic, was moved here from the third floor of the Wells block, where the post office now stands, on Main Street, when the veterans were too feeble to climb the stairs. The rink burned in 1915, never to be rebuilt. Pine Street, not Main Street, was the first street in the borough to be laid out with definite plans. Perhaps due to its close vicinity to the railroad station, it became the primary business and residential thoroughfare in town in the days between the beginning of the railroad and the end of the Civil War. In 1855, Pine Street had numerous businesses and dwellings. Among them, Lawrence Stevens and Isaac Little built a large store on the corner of Pine and Walnut Streets. For years, it was well stocked with general merchandise. Little sold his store to Lemuel Harding, who sold clothing, dry goods, and groceries. Lawrence Stevens opened a new store on Main Street behind the one on Pine Street. In 1911, these buildings were merged to become the Hotel Elmont. Below Oak Street, facing Pine, was the woodworking shop of Francis Burke and his son John. They were coopers and made barrels, tubs, kegs, firkins, wooden pails, etc. They shaped oak boards to the right shape to make the staves. The hoops were oaken branches, which they soaked for days to soften them, being held underwater with heavy stones in Martin's Creek near the footbridge. Just below the Burkes was a furniture store and undertaking business of William Sprague. He made furniture and coffins of cherry, maple, and oak. Also on Pine Street, Jeremiah Weld and James Pedrick built a feed mill to receive shipments of grain coming in from the Lackawanna. This is where the feed mill finds antique shop and plant business is now located. Coal chutes were added for 6 different sizes of coal. Later, the business was divided. Wells owned the coal chutes and Pedrick the mill. Wells sold the coal business to Harry Fillmore, Jr. He in turn sold it to Harold Falls in 1962. J. Pedrick continued in the feed business until his death in 1940, when Harold Falls bought it from Pedrick's sons. In 1967, Allied Mills Incorporated acquired the Wayne feed store from Worthmore, only to close it a year later on March 1st, 1968. On the corner of Pine and Oak, behind the post office, is a small building, which was Jack Barnes's barber shop, now a residence. On the corner of Pine and East State Street was a wagon shop of Wallace Warner. It had a Pine Street entrance. About 1890, the largest wagon which was ever seen in this area was made. It was built for Penn Avenue Transfer Company of Scranton. It weighed 3,500 pounds, was 6.5 feet wide, and was 20 feet long. Back wheels were 6 feet in height, and the room was 6 inches wide. It was shipped to Scranton on the railroad. Mr. Warner made all types and sizes of wagons, carriages, buggies, sleighs, bobsleds, children's sleds, wheelbarrows, etc. He hammered out all the iron pieces he used on a forge and worked the wood into sizes and shapes he needed. His son George Warner did all the painting, striping, and decorating. These were works of art and greatly in demand. On State Street, where the traffic circle is now, several small stores once stood. On the town side of the culvert, Harry Burke built the first cement block building in town in 1906. The first floor was a store, the second living quarters. Steve Kamen was the last merchant to own the store, called Plumbers, and he primarily sold a variety of boots and galoshes, among other items, including gasoline. On the corner of State and Main Streets, where the Dollar General store now stands, a hardware store, well, going the wrong way. Not yet. There we go. That'd be the one. On the corner of State and Main, a hardware store was built about 1880 by Edwin Roberts. This store had at least 17 owners and or co-owners over the years, all selling hardware until about 1940, when the A&P moved there from across the street. It has been a grocery store ever since and had been enlarged several times. The last owner was Dave Schmidt, who bought and removed some houses adjacent to the store to make room for parking lot. Behind the store, going up the hill towards High Street, Marcella Roberts had a beauty shop from her home for many years. And across the street, across from the street from Schmidt's was the sale barn, now for sale. They had livestock auctions every Tuesday, well, into the evening. Originally, this was the site of the livery for the Niagara Hotel and the town stable where you could rent horses. On the other corner of State and Main stood the residence of the Squire family. This dwelling was torn down years ago and replaced with the current People's Security Bank. Next to People's Bank was a small building where Dr. Bushko, a dentist, had his office, and later the beauty shop of Audrey Perry. Next to the Farmer Supply on State Street was a small building built by N.P. Wilcox for a post office, and later for his surveyor's office. He was a surveyor for local people, and for a decade he was the official surveyor for Wyoming County. The Wilcox office became the press room and the office of the Nicholson Record newspaper from 1904 to 1933. The presses were operated by water power from the borough's water mains, as was the Nicholson Examiner. So many of our early photos of Nicholson families and scenes throughout the borough are attributable to Lyman Pratt, who used the second floor as a photographic studio. Adjacent to the Farmer's Supply was Vina Blossom's Beauty Salon. In her front window was an electric permanent wave machine with dangling perm rods attached to wires. A true instrument of torture if there ever was one.
I remember that.
Can you imagine curling her hair with electricity on purpose? The next building going west was built in 1928 to replace an older one, and has always been, until recent years, a multitude of insurance agencies, including Black & Stevens in 1906, Troster, 1950, Woolburn, Price in 1964, and Hawk. The older building was moved to the back of the new one and was used for various meetings and storage until it was demolished. The Methodist Church was built on the lot that formerly was the furniture store of Charles Mack. The furniture was manufactured in Brooklyn, PA at Mack's Mill. He was in business 25 years and was, of course, an undertaker. He had the first elaborate drawn hearse in Nicholson. Joseph Carpenter was his successor in the furniture store business only until it burned in 1894. Main Street, early Main Street, was a conglomerate of houses, barns, and the start of stores and business, which was approached by walking through alleys from Pine Street. This is an 1870 photo of Main Street. A little different today, huh? In 1875, the buildings on the east side of the street were moved back about 8 feet to make room for a sidewalk and a wider street. All the buildings on the west side of the street were destroyed by fire, first in 1873 and again in 1904. Each time the new buildings were built further away from the street. On the upper west side of the street is now the Nicholson Lumber Company. It was started in 1945 by George Wesley Herron and has grown extensively over the years to include the buildings originally used by the Dairymen's League and the creameries. The business has been owned and operated by the Herons through 4 generations. Next was the International Harvester business owned by the Novich family. It was operational for many years, selling and servicing farm equipment and trucks. Next was the store, originally built by Nelson Tice. Judson Bush bought this property for Purina Feed and Farm Supply Store. He was in business for a number of years until Don Rogers bought the property to continue his mother's business of publishing the Nicholson Examiner. However, he never published the newspaper in this building, but did print posters and other such items here. The building is now owned by Kurt and Melody Sussman and is an antique and collectibles store called Melvin's Mercantile. Next to this building, Joseph Eckert had a silk mill. The International Harvest Company was here for a time and was a bakery and the office for S.J. Bailey. And on March 10th, 1961, Herb Krause opened a jewelry store here. Also at the same time, Harold Riker opened a sound service store business in this building, whatever that might have been, where the current fire hall is located. Patrick Leon opened a Nicolette movie theater after the fire of 1904, which started in this building there. he opened the Nicolette Movie Theater, which was bought by the Eckerts, remodeled, and renamed the Palace. They operated for over 40 years. About 1932, they added a second floor to the theater and rented it for community activities. The large room was used for the Assembly of God's Sunday afternoon services about once a month and continued for several years. Both the theater and the Eckert building were demolished for the fire hall in 1959. Due to the Great Fire, the west side of Main Street between Oak and Walnut Streets dates from 1904. Jack Rendell's Drugstore, now Germana's Pizza, F. Proper's store, the former Acme, then Western Auto, and F. Williams Building, former library and now the laundromat, were rebuilt the same year. The Will Smith Building, now Lax Pharmacy, in 1910, and Schwartz's, now Crosdale's, in 1913. In 1888, on the corner of Main and Walnut Streets, a large building with room for 2 businesses on the first floor and 2 apartments upstairs were built by William Driggs for his insurance office on one side. Fred William was postmaster on the other until the fire. The building was rebuilt exactly like the former. Dr. William Alexander had his office on the north side for over 40 years. Cornell's Grocery Market occupied the other side for quite a few years before closing. The public library then moved in this spot and remained open until librarians Alice Powers and Mary Rush could no longer do it. It is now the laundromat. Nicholson businessmen have always been very prosperous. However, there was no way to keep their cash assets safe. A petition was presented to the Wyoming County Court requesting that they be granted a charter to issue stock under an act of the Assembly of Pennsylvania Legislature. The charter was granted in 1872. The local men organized the Nicholson's Savings Fund Building and Loan Association. They rented space in the Burge Building, more about that one in a minute, for the office. During the first 6 months of the association, 913 shares of stock were issued to 180 members. The charter stipulated the association would automatically expire when each share had a value of $200. Thus, it had to be dissolved after nearly 25 years. This caused a great deal of concern for the residents, and after studying bank operations, the people felt Nicholson could organize their own bank. In 1905, a charter was granted for this purpose. They bought the land on Main Street next to the Driggs Building for $800. The bank was of gray brick and native bluestone. The main door was approached by 3 perfect bluestone steps. Across the front, above the door, was placed a big blue stone slab. Cut into this was First National Bank. Shares of stock were issued at $100 a share. By the time the bank was ready to open, 500 shares had been sold, which gave the bank $50,000 as capital. Bank profits were carefully invested for future use, and when the need for a bigger building became evident in the late 1950s, the Coyle property on the corner of Oak and Main Streets was chosen for the new bank site. The money set aside for future use paid for a large portion of the cost of the new bank. The new bank was dedicated on February 17, 1962. and one of the many inconvenient features was that of the drive-through window, a revolutionary trend in banking. At that time, the assets of the bank had increased to well over $4 million. Federal banking regulations changed the method by which bank stock could be sold or owned. Stock could be sold to out-of-town people at a highly inflated rate, and stock splits found many new owners. Nicholsonians began losing control of the bank. In a few years, it was evident the bank would have to be sold and all stock bought up or traded due to a sharp division within the board of directors. Eventually, Community Bancorp Incorporated became the holding group. The bank is no longer here, and the building is currently for sale. Proper's store is next to the old bank and was rebuilt after the fire in 1904. This was the third building on this site, the other two also having burnt. Frank Proper continued in business until his death in 1924. His wife continued to operate the store for 10 years. His son-in-law, Wayne Stevens, along with Wayne's brother, Clarence, became the merchants. The Acme store was here for a few years until it closed. Stevens sold the building to Frank Phillips, who moved the Western Auto Store here from across the street and occupied this location for many years. In recent years, it has been used as a co-op and currently is empty. Nathan Schwartz moved into the current Crowsdale Sporting Goods store when it was rebuilt in 1913. He sold clothing. His brother Sam continued here until his death in 1964. His son Leonard continued the family business selling clothes and accessories, and in later years added guns to the inventory. Next to Schwartz's, another brother, Louis, sold fruit and fresh vegetables. This building was rebuilt in 1910. Leo and Ethel Granger bought this store and opened a 5 and Dime. They were in business many years. In later years, they referred to it as the 5 cent to $1 store, having in Nicholson the first dollar store. Lex Pharmacy is now in this building. Where Germana's is now was originally the drugstore of Jack Reynolds, followed by Oscar Reynolds. After his death, it was taken over by his brother-in-law, R.C. Dix. In 1948, Pete Stokowski bought the building and remodeled it inside and out. It was a Rexall store. It was noted for its annual 1 cent sale. Purchasing a Rexall brand item at the regular price entitled the customer to purchase another for only a penny. Not quite the buy one, get one, but still not too shabby. In the early days of drugstores, the druggist prepared all of the medicines, elixirs, medicinal concoctions by hand. The drugstore had an added customer enticement, that of the soda fountain, as they would call it in the day. The soda fountain was born in the 1850s, when people would seek fountain drinks for their local drugstore to cure physical ailments. At the time, many fountain drinks were concoctions of extracts of flavored effervescent drugs. Cocaine and caffeine were among such popular drugs found in pharmacy drinks. This combination was used for headache treatment. As patients began to suffer rebound headaches, they would return again and again for more drinks to treat their pain. I wonder why. Patients enjoyed visiting the soda fountain to get some pep. At the time, it was widely believed that stimulants were safe and effective. Many druggists even made and marketed their own secret formulas. Selling cocaine-derived drinks was completely legal, as every drug was over the counter. However, in 1914, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act became under law under President Woodrow Wilson, and it was banned the use of cocaine and opiates in over-the-counter products. Preservative-free soda syrup with flavorings extracted from natural fruits such as orange crush and cherry smash became common in the local drugstores. The soda jerk would add carbonated water and phosphate to the syrup to make a unique beverage. Soda fountains really came into being in the 1920s when other sweet treats, such as ice cream, were added to the carbonated beverages to make ice cream floats, and sundaes were making their debut, and the banana split was invented by a Pennsylvania pharmacist. Coca-Cola, named for the cocaine it contained, was invented in 1886 by a pharmacist. Pepsi was invented by a pharmacist at his own drugstore in 1893, so named because he believed it would aid indigestion or dyspepsia. Dr. Pepper, the oldest major soft drink brand in America, was created by a pharmacist in 1885. At the Nicholson Rexall in the 1960s, you could get a glass of Coke for a nickel and a hot fudge sundae for 35 cents. There was also a huge selection of candy which could be purchased for a penny each. If you had more than a dime to spend, you could be there all day selecting these tantalizing morsels. And as a clerk in that store for a good many years, I know they did. Somebody came in with a quarter, you could count on, you're going to be there half an hour helping them pick out these candies.
Oh, so what are they?
In 1968, Elwood Squire bought the drugstore and operated it for many years. It then became the Napa store owned by Tom Henry. Olivo's Pizza was here for a time, and currently Joanna's Pizzeria. On the corner of Oak and Main, a brick building was erected in 1910 for a hardware store by Frank Boyle and Hendrick Wilkins. Other proprietors in this location have been Matthews Feed Store, Charles Terry, Riker Granger, Lockens Market, Medrick Supply, and the Pinery. Next to the brick building, a small barber shop was erected in 1900 by Charles Brown. Francis Ray of England followed Brown and cut hair for over 50 years. Over the barber shop was the dentist's office of Dr. James Reynolds, followed by Dr. Edward Bell, until his death in 1926. Dr. Powers and Malone followed. In this building was the Wallace Dress Shop. It was in business from the 1950s until 1969. Next door was a meat market. George Locken began in this building in 1915 and lived upstairs. Paul and Stanley Locken later managed the store and removed the barber shop, bought the brick building, and made a large addition to the store. One of the features in shopping at this grocery store was their home delivery service, available long before it became fashionable to do so. Also, the ability to charge purchases, which was quite rare in the grocery business. Nicholson experienced a tremendous loss when Lockens, the last grocer in town, closed his doors. Bert Stevens opened the Play Jeu Theater in the next building, showing silent movies. When he became postmaster, it became the post office from 1923 to 1961, when it was moved to the present location. Where the office bar and grill is now, Patsy Capella had a barber shop from 1939 until he retired. For many years, barbershop quartets sang Saturday nights on the stoop of the barbershop just for the fun of it. The Bell Telephone Exchange was on the second floor, operated by local people around the clock. Since then, there have been others in business here. The building was erected about 1870. This building, like others on this side of the street, was built some 3 feet above sidewalk level. The basement was partly above ground level and used as a store. Steps going to it were in the front of the building. John Blair sold clothing, shoes, and other accessories. There was a meat market in the basement. It's been a grocery store, and for decades, it has been a restaurant, now the Nicholson Diner. This building was lowered about 1930. The next building was built before 1870. It was J. Harding owned the building and had a grocery store here. In 1938, Leland Knapp bought the business, remodeled the front, lowered the building, and operated it until his death in 1960. Margaret and Catherine Reynolds bought this building and moved their store from the corner estate in Main Street. The Reynolds girls had taken over their father's drugstore, removed the drugs from their inventory, and continued to operate a variety-type store, catering more to the women folk. Upon their retirement in 1973, they sold it to Jerry Lindsay, who continued to operate it in the same fashion, now Lindsay's Variety Haircuts. This building was lowered to the street level in 1955. The next building was built in 1874 by Charles Bridge. The first floor was divided into 2 equal store spaces with numerous proprietors over the years, including for some 20 years, the Nicholson Savings Fund Building and Loan Association. Dr. Charles Newton had a drugstore on the north side, and A.G. Williams sold out-of-town newspapers and magazines. In 1911, Burge sold to Leo Reynolds. Reynolds was here until 1928, when he moved to the corner of Main and State. Next to this location was the Grand Union store, as well as many others. Charles Williams had a post office here, and Everington Bell, who had a hardware store. For more than 75 years, the second floor, which was made soundproof, was the town lodge hall for numerous, some obscure lodges, in addition to the regular Odd Fellows, Masons, Eastern Star, etc. There was the Independent Order of Red Men, the White Owls, and several others. The next buildings were erected at different times by different owners and date from about 1890 and were also built above street level. The Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company began here in about 1925. The Northeastern Telephone Company had an exchange on the second floor. Emma Steele had a Larkin store downstairs when the A&P moved next door for larger store space. Prior to that move, Isaac Bosberg had a dry goods and furniture store. The store on the corner was the first of these 3 to be erected. It faced State Street and was built in 1865 by Nathan Wilcox for hardware store. Frank Krapp became his partner and specialized in ready-made paint sealed in airtight oak buckets. Charles Schiffler opened a furniture store and had an undertaking business. In 1908, he sold to Charles Terry, who continued in the furniture business and was a funeral director. William Quick joined him as a hardware merchant. Edward Ace also joined them. He sold paint and was also an undertaker. They changed the storefront to Main Street. The partnership dissolved when Mr. Ace became postmaster. Mr. Quick retired, and Charles Terry bought the brick building further up north on Main Street and continued to sell hardware, furniture, and continued with the funeral business. Bill Purvis bought the building and had it lowered to street level. Eventually, Margaret and Elmer Nordahl bought these many buildings and made the Farmer Supply from them. They have been a mainstay in town for many years with a very extensive inventory, from lumber to furniture to firearms and everything in between. On the east side of Main Street was the Coyle property, where the vacant First National Bank is located. At one time, it encompassed over an acre of land. The house was built in 1855. Joanna and Elizabeth Coyle lived here and opened a millinery store in the house and operated it for over 60 years. The Coyles used the L of the house for the millinery shop, showroom, and workroom. There were showcases on the front porch to tempt customers, and more inside. In this room was a large, full-length mirror with a low marble top shelf in front. There were other mirrors and many showcases against the wall and shelves with glass doors. There were hats everywhere. South of this room was the workroom, where there were stacks of naked crowns and brims waiting for covering and trimming. Endless spools of ribbon and satin, yards of buckram, feathers and flowers galore. There was a sewing machine, a workbench, and a rocking chair facing the south window. Upon Lizzie's death, the house was emptied and left to deterioration. The house was torn down in 1960 for the bank. Where the post office
Kathy, you can blame whoever put those slides together for you if they're in the wrong order. I'll take it. I'll take the heat.
And I just wondered if I was...
That's the lady with her hands on her head.
Yeah, that's not... Oh, yes, it is. I'm sorry. We're good. We're right on track.
Okay.
It's me. It was a test. Okay. Where the post office now stands was a building built in 1870 known as the Wills Block. That be it. It was built by Andrew Wells as a jewelry store. The Nicholson Examiner newspaper, which began in 1871, was printed on the third floor. Lemuel Harding moved his clothing, dry goods, and grocery business to this store. His niece had a millinery shop and sold furs in this building as well. Harper Kling bought it in 1897 and remodeled it and made additions to make one big store. He carried a large stock of everything anyone would need and continued in business until 1930. He was very prosperous, had a great business, with people clustering to his store to shop there. He had the first system for artificial lighting of anyone in Nicholson. It was a night system of gasoline distribution lights. These were used whenever the store was open for total illumination. This permitted the store to be open in the evening hours. And these lights were used even after most of the other stores had electric lights. The Western Auto opened a store in this building before moving across the street, and the sportswear factory was in this building until it moved to Walnut Street. This building was demolished in 1960 for the new post office. Garford Williams, our renowned local historian, gave the following account of the layout of this Kling store. building was lighted with gas lights until electricity was furnished to the borough. There was also a big kerosene lamp in the middle of the store. As you entered the front door, you approached the jewelry counter. Back of this were open counters, open shelves against the back walls, and a potbelly stove used on cold days. There was a furnace for steam heat in the cellar for winter. To the left of the front entrance was the dry goods counter with a glass plate top so the customer could see into the drawers. Behind the counter were bolts of yard goods, and in front of the counter were a dozen swivel stools for the comfort of the customer while selecting her goods. At the end of this counter was a showcase filled with old-fashioned doll heads. These were always fascinating to children. On the south side of the store, or grocery side, were showcases of old-fashioned candy, the pencil-like red and white peppermint sticks, and the deep red quarter-sized cinnamon drops called belly burners. There was a round cheese case upon which the cat slept, as if to guard against any loss due to a mischievous mouse. Under the counter was a large wooden barrel, usually about a third or a quarter full, of the best bulk brown sugar in the whole world. Of course, the barrel wasn't the most sanitary way to keep sugar, and often you would find things in the sugar, such as a sliver of wood, cat hair, a thread, or mouse droppings. But still, it was the best tasting brown sugar, and oatmeal doesn't taste the same without it. Mr. Kling was a jeweler of a type and tinkered with clocks and watches for many years. His workbench was in his office. He carried jewelry of various sorts in stock. Opposite the office was a shoe department. There was no refrigeration in the store, and the perishable goods were kept in the cellar bottom, sometimes with disastrous results. In the spring of each year, garden seeds adorned the stone platform in front of the store. There were about 6 or 8 12-quart open pails of seeds to tempt the trade of garden lovers. And these, of course, we were sold by the ounce, all separately, or by the pound, depending. And many a boy would delight in mixing the seeds from one pail to another. On Saturday nights, the folding slat benches in front of the store would be occupied by the Kling family and their friends to enable them to greet their friends and customers, as Saturday nights were big nights in Nicholson in good weather. The oldest remaining building on Main Street is that of the current Carl Rogers Garage. Originally built in 1850, 175 years ago, by Albert King, and served as the first general store on the street. In 1885, under new ownership, an addition was added to the north side of the store, and a tin shop was opened in the basement. Over the years, this building, with each new owner, became a plumbing establishment, a fresh produce store, a clothing store, and since 1918, that's 107 years, it has continued to be a garage. Irving Billings built a large 3-story building in 1865 next to the now Carl Rogers Garage. A drugstore was on the first floor, living quarters on the second, and the third floor was built for a lodge room. The store was sold and became a general store for 25 years. Stephen Jay bought the building and business and was a merchant for nearly 50 years. He was the first store to have a large ice refrigerator to store fresh meats and dairy products, a meat slicer to cut dried beef, which was a rare delicacy, and an electric coffee grinder. After his retirement, Judson Bush had a feed store in this building for 7 years before he built a store further up Main Street, where Melbourne's Mercantile is now. When Stevens bought the building in 1945, he made extensive changes throughout, including an entirely new front. He was in the heating and plumbing business. And in 1963, Tina's clothing store moved here for a while. The Napa store is presently in this building. On the corner of Walnut and Main is a garage and gas station owned at one time by Malcolm Hinckley, starting in 1946 and continuing for many years. Then Jay McCracken owned it for a time, and Stan DeLuca owns the building now. Next was the 1920s garage of George B. Rod, who sold Chevrolets. It was bought by Walter Sherwood, who combined the Chevrolet dealership and added Buicks to his inventory. He had a showroom on Walnut Street near the depot, and his son Don now displays his vintage cars in the showroom. Eventually, the dealership dissolved, and for many years, I bet you wondered what happened for many years. The garage continued as an automotive repair business. It was recently demolished for a new fire hall under construction. Although also, further up the east side of Main Street in 1925 was Corey Spencer's garage, Joel Walker's Monument Company, and Eddie Payne's blacksmith shop. At the extreme northeast end of the street were the businesses of the tannery, the creameries, Bailey's, Croc's Feed Mill, and others. Due to the nature of these businesses, commentary has been reserved until our September tribute to Nicholson's Industries. These early merchants were very prosperous and were well respected. People traveled great distances to buy from them. In the 1930s, several thousand people would come to Nicholson on Saturday nights to shop here. In the 1950s and 60s, Main Street was filled with people on Friday nights, payday, to do their banking, shopping, and socializing. Businesses were open until 9 p.m., and it was a hub of activity, and it is greatly missed. Thank you very much. Everybody, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
I'm not done yet. Photos came from those two books. Thank you for coming.
Kathy, we have a question. Question.
Question.
You have a question?
Question?
Yeah, Kathy, we have a question.
Oh, question.
Yeah.
I was wondering, is there anything that says what started the Great Fire of 1904?
Mm-hmm. It was a stovepipe in the upstairs apartment.
Okay.
And it could have been extinguished had they been paying attention to it. But as it turned out then, of course, it got away from them, and we had no fire equipment. It was in February. Pipes were frozen up. There was no even standing water. And before it was all said and done, 20 buildings, 6 residents, and it was amazing. It was just total, just gone, It's unbelievable. And they had sent for steamers from other areas like Scranton and that kind of thing. but on the railroad. By the time they got here, there wasn't anything to say.
Oh, you've been.
Scranton never even took a steamer off the train.
Yeah.
No point. They were just gone. 4 hours time, they were gone. Yes, Bob?
I'm Bob Gritman, and along with Joan, and today Josh, we're a part of the Nicholson Heritage Association. This committee has used our building gladly to have them as a point of reference for the year-long celebration that is being conducted right now. Our Heritage has redone this 1849 train station, and we welcome people to come back if they chose to just tour the station itself. But we're grateful to have Kathy and the committee that is doing these presentations. But we're also going to be open on Saturdays for a little tour of what the railroads have done for Nicholson. So that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, and please sign our.
Oh, yes. Make sure to sign our book.
One more question. Yeah, one more question.
Well, I have just an anecdote to share about the history of the town. I seem old enough to remember, but a lot of the people that you remembered, I personally knew, and I want to share a story as a young man, probably less than 10 years old, with Juddy Bush. I knew Juddy Bush, and I had a neighbor, his name was Louis Johnson. Juddy Bush, I don't know if anybody knew it, was actually a baseball pitcher. And he was a very good baseball pitcher. And he teamed up with local, we used to have amateur baseball teams all over the country. And there was one in Nicholson, I'm not familiar with the history, but I knew they were members of it. So pitcher-catcher combination, Juddy Bush and Louis Johnson wound up taking up an offer for a one-day tryout for the New York Yankees. Now, Juddy was in, I won't say which bar in town because I shouldn't have been there, but that's beside the point. But he was telling this story about how he and Louis Johnson went and got a one-day tryout for the New York Yankees, and this was just something the Yankees did to see if they could just find a diamond in the rough or something like that. And he told this story, and I asked him a few questions, and they were talking about how the tryout went. Did you get to bat against anybody? I asked him directly. I said, did you get to bat against any of the New York Yankee pitchers? Which, that was my team back in the days. So he said, yep. I got a chance to bat against Whitey Ford. And my eyes bugged out because I knew who Whitey Ford was. And I knew who Mickey Mantle was. And I knew who Roger Maris was. I said, you got to bat against Whitey Ford? I said, how'd you do? He just said one phrase. He says, couldn't even see the ball. That's a true story.
And please, folks, before you go, you should peruse some of the